From the headquarters of Telesur English in Quito, Ecuador, this is From the South, and I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Cubans are set to vote on a referendum this Sunday. This vote will decide whether the island adopts a new constitution. Our correspondent in Cuba, Luis Autier, brings us more details.
Yes, good afternoon. Indeed, the National Electoral Commission offered a press conference this morning to show some results of the dynamic test that took place last Sunday. As a result of this, now we know that we have over 24,000 polling colleges in Cuba, but also over 1,000 polling colleges abroad, so the Cuban who lives in other countries can go and vote that important day. But also there are over 400,000 people working in this referendum in the colleges, counting votes, everything. So it's a big number of people working for the referendum. But not everything are good news. According to the Commission, 2.52% of the colleges presented some kind of problems regarding to transportation, communications, personnel, so that's why all the provinces will have to give part to the Commission next Wednesday to say the problems they found, and a day after that they will have a teleconference explaining what they did to fix those problems. This is pretty much what we have now in that matter. We'll be back with more. Back to you.
Venezuelan President Nicolás Maduro is participating in a graduation ceremony for international community doctors. The 128 international students of medicine brings the total number of graduates from the program over the last 6 years to nearly 1,500. President Maduro said that he's committed to expanding the capacity to receive students from around the world so that more people can study and become doctors in Venezuela.
It's the true socialism, Bolivarian and Christian. It's the real humanist socialism. This is the real humanitarian aid. It's not humanitarian aid, it's solidarity, as an expression of love between peoples. Donald Trump. This is the real aid to help people, to graduate doctors, thousands and thousands from one year to the next, so that they can bestow health, so they can take health to the people of the world.
Mr. Imperator, Donald Trump.
The Venezuelan armed forces have rejected U.S. President Donald Trump's call for them to turn their back on President Nicolás Maduro. The Minister of Defense, Vladimir Padrino Lopez, called Trump's speech arrogant and said it promoted terrorism. He said the armed forces recognize only one commander-in-chief, President Maduro. Padrino Lopez said it's outrageous that Trump thinks he can give orders to Venezuelan soldiers.
The Bolivarian armed forces will never accept any orders from a government or foreign power, or any authority that doesn't come from the sovereign decision of the people. We will stand along the borders, as called by our commander-in-chief, to avoid any violation to the integrity of our territory.
Earlier on Tuesday, the Cuban foreign minister held a news conference where he called out the hypocrisy of the U.S. government in ignoring its own people's struggles.
Habló de democracia.
Mr. Trump spoke about democracy while ignoring the large number of U.S. citizens, mainly black and Latino, who are not allowed to vote. Out of 40 million people living in poverty in the U.S., half are children. Trump ignored the over 500,000 homeless people who live in his country. He ignores the systematic racism that exists in his country, from the justice system to the ongoing cases of police brutality against African Americans. He didn't mention the lack of unions for workers, or that U.S. women don't have the right to equal pay with men. He spoke about Venezuelan migrants, but he didn't mention his border wall. He didn't mention his government's cruel policy of separating children from their parents at the border, or the deaths of some migrant children in detention centers.
On Monday, we spoke with the editor of The Grayson, Max Blumenthal, about the so-called humanitarian aid which Colombia and the United States says will be forced into Venezuela.
Well, Marco Rubio, a figure that Trump referred to as Little Marco in the 2016 campaign, and who's been referred to here, I think, by a government minister as Narco Rubio, is down on the Colombian border in Cucuta, and that pretty much means that the aid is going to go through. There's also a live aid concert planned by billionaire tax cheat and human impersonator Richard Branson. I don't know how they're going to pull that off in a few days, getting all these high-profile acts, but there is a gigantic humanitarian intervention, manipulation, and propaganda show taking place on the border, and it really does suggest that the aid will go through one way or another despite Nicolas Maduro and the Venezuelan military declaring their refusal to accept it, and that is frightening. It's frightening to some people I've spoken to in the government. What they fear is a Syria-style scenario, some kind of attack and some kind of provocation that could lead to an escalation and the war that Rubio and many people in Washington seem to want. The Venezuelan opposition has no clear plan to distribute that aid, and though they've signed up 200,000 volunteers to distribute it, it's unclear how they're going to get it around the country to the people supposedly in need. And finally, the U.S. media has created this lie that there is a shortage of goods in Venezuela and that the aid is actually something other than a humanitarian interventionist propaganda show. That lie is clear when you go around Caracas and go to any supermarket and you see that there are no shortages here, that the issue is speculation, hyperinflation, and the U.S. economic war, which makes this aid actually a drop in the bucket compared to the billions and billions of assets that the U.S. government is preventing the Venezuelan government from receiving.
English songwriter and Pink Floyd co-founder Roger Waters has slammed Richard Branson's so-called aid concert as part of a scheme to push for a regime change in Venezuela.
I've just seen a video clip of Branson with his bleeding heart worn openly upon his Virgin Airways t-shirt. The important thing about this is that even if you listen to their shtick, it has nothing to do with humanitarian aid at all. It has to do with Richard Branson, and I'm not surprised by this, having bought the US saying, we have decided to take over Venezuela for whatever our reasons may be, but it has nothing to do with the needs of the Venezuelan people. It has nothing to do with democracy. It has nothing to do with freedom, and it has nothing to do with aid. Because it's very easy to be led down a garden path that ends in regime change. Do we really want Venezuela to turn into another Iraq or Syria or Libya? I don't, and neither do the Venezuelan people.
Speaking in the Spanish parliament, a member of the Podemos party has demanded the Spanish government explain their position if a military intervention were to happen in Venezuela. He also called the government's support for the opposition lawmaker who proclaimed himself interim president irresponsible.
You should explain here in this chamber. What are you going to do if a military intervention happens in Venezuela? Is the Spanish government going to support it? And if not, why did the government throw their support behind a self-proclaimed president in the country which was not facing any real risk of an armed conflict? It was an irresponsible and completely wrong decision.
Calm is slowly returning to the streets of Haiti following a week and a half of protests that left a number of people dead. Here's the latest.
These schools' doors remain closed. There have been nearly 2 weeks of demonstrations. Thousands of Haitians taking to the streets to demand the ousting of President Jovenel Moïse. And while today saw no protests, the schools are still closed.
Kids are still at home. This is troublesome. I have 4 kids sitting at home doing nothing. I want them in school.
While the government has called for a return to normality, parents still feel the streets are not safe.
When you go out on the streets, you're taking a risk. You could be attacked or end up in the hospital. I'm saying this now because you asked me, but I don't know if speaking out is worth it anymore. In Haiti, nobody cares about what we have to say.
It's been the people who have been taking to the streets. 80% of the population lives in extreme poverty. There's a lot of distrust in the government, which continues to ask for calm.
This is an extremely tough situation. The government has shown no discipline when it comes to public spending.
While some banks and markets have started to operate again, the road to peace is still long.
Citizens must be the ones to help things return to normal, and it will be a slow process. The government lacks credibility, so anything they say has little meaning.
There is a lack of credibility because the government has failed to provide access to education to 50% of Haitian children. While the country is slowly recovering from the violence that took place these past few days, the causes that led to those protests remain unchanged.
Our correspondent in Port-au-Prince, Pablo Perez, brings us on the developing situation in the country.
Here in Port-au-Prince, normality seems to have returned to the streets, despite the fact schools remain closed. The big news today is the arrest of a number of individuals wearing tactical gear and carrying high-powered weapons. They initially claimed to work for the government, but President Moïse has denied these claims. These news have caused some commotion as the opposition believes this is an attempt to make the protesters appear to be armed and violent. Disregarding the fact, protesters are everyday citizens who are demanding the resignation of President Moïse due to numerous accusations of corruption.
That was Pablo Perez from Haiti. We'll be back in a minute. Stay with us. Welcome back. In Guyana, an aircraft transporting the body of a dead man from another part of the country has crashed. The pilot and a policeman survived the crash and remain hospitalized. The Civil Aviation Authority says the plane reportedly ran out of fuel mid-flight. Jamaica youths will get survival skills training thanks to the government initiative called the HOPE program. People between the ages 18 and 24 will receive training in social, academic, and technical skills in order to contribute to society. According to Prime Minister Andrew Holness, the program targets those currently unemployed. He said the program will help develop Jamaica and empower its youth.
We see a future where these
An International Monetary Fund mission is in Argentina reviewing the country's economic performance following the implementation of austerity measures. Our correspondent in Buenos Aires, Edgardo Esteban, has more.
IMF representatives continue assessing the country's economic performance following austerity measures they demanded before providing a $57 billion loan to the government. In March, if all goals are met, another disbursement will be made by the IMF of $11 billion. This, despite runaway inflation, which has already reached 6% since the start of 2019, but is expected to surpass 30% before the end of the year. The IMF representatives have also been meeting with some opposition leaders, due to the fact that opinion polls show Mauricio Macri is widely rejected by the people and could be voted out of office in October. Let's not forget that the IMF demands that the country stay in their current economic roadmap due to the loan made by President Macri.
In Ecuador, as President Lenin Moreno continues privatizing key public sectors, workers are taking to the streets in protest.
Ecuadorian Councillor Santiago Cuesta reaffirmed the government's positions on privatizing public companies such as the National Corporation of Communication. According to Cuesta, the decision was made after irregularities inside the company came to light. He added that the workers that resist changes will face sanctions.
He tried to say that sanctions will come if workers leave their post and go out to protest while they are working. And we have workers who have been removed from their post because they left work.
Meanwhile, the majority of labor unions have taken to the streets against the recent economic policies imposed by President Moreno. They condemn massive layoffs, talks with the IMF, and fuel prices hikes. They describe the recent massive demonstration against the government as positive, despite Cuesta's threats of being fired.
People are beginning to realize that a state-backed purge is coming despite all our hard work over these years. Now we are in danger of losing everything. We know that privatization will bring losses.
The government is set on the path of neoliberalism as a way to improve the country's economy, but affected workers say they will remain steadfast in their resistance and will continue taking to the streets until Moreno prioritizes workers' rights. Denise Herrera, Telesur, Ecuador.
Colombian organizations are filing complaints at the Inter-American Commission of Human Rights about the massive amount of forced disappearances in the country. According to the Red Cross, there were more than 83,000 cases of forced disappearances registered between 1958 and 2017. And social organizations say there are some 26,000 identified bodies in over 400 cemeteries across Colombia. And organizations also reported that the desert region of La Guajira is suffering from a humanitarian crisis. Over the last 8 years, over 4,700 indigenous Wayuu children have died of malnutrition. The region is heavily affected by climate change and droughts caused by hydroelectric dams. Wildfires in Chile have devastated tens of thousands of hectares of land in the country. Our correspondent in Santiago, Paola Dragnik, has the latest.
Over 4,000 wildfires have razed parts of southern and central Chile, with more than 50,000 hectares of land destroyed. President Sebastián Piñera made the announcement at a news conference. Piñera has come under fire for his planned trip to the Venezuelan-Colombian border on Friday to help deliver so-called humanitarian aid. Piñera is doing so at the invitation of Venezuelan opposition lawmaker Juan Guaidó. Critics on social media have accused President Piñera of meddling in Venezuela's affairs while neglecting the fires raging in his own country. Meanwhile, in Chile, thousands of firefighters are still trying to bring the wildfires under control. However, these fire officers are also facing an uphill battle over what they describe as poor working conditions affecting their health and safety.
We thank Paola for that report. Heavy rainfall in Bolivia has hampered the country's efforts to destroy tens of thousands of hectares of illegal coca crops.
The government embarked on an ambitious coca eradication program, but the bad weather has blocked it.
For example, in Yungas de La Paz, last year we eradicated between 15 to 20 hectares a day. Today we are only eradicating between 2 and 4 hectares. The rain has made it difficult. It's the same scenario in Cochabamba.
The government took the decision to remove coca crops with the consent of farmers who produce coca. The agreements were incentivized by development programs for the farming families.
All of these communities that will be affected with the eradication of illegal coca will be supported by the government with initiatives, such as agricultural production. This way, they have a legitimate income to maintain their families.
The agreement with the campesino unions reduced violence and conflict with coca producers.
In other countries, there's no participation from social movements. Rather, there's discrimination. The government applies its programs, and it's not going well. While in Bolivia, since President Evo Morales came, the fight against drug trafficking has been nationalized.
In the continent, Colombia is the largest producer of coca, with 208,000 hectares, followed by Peru and Bolivia. However, Bolivia allows the production of 22,000 hectares for traditional, medicinal, chewing, and indigenous rituals.
Tanzania has sentenced a Chinese businesswoman nicknamed the Ivory Queen to 15 years in jail. Yang Fenglan was arrested in 2015 following more than a year investigation. She was convicted on charges relating to the smuggling of around 800 pieces of ivory between 2000 and 2014. 2 Tanzanian men were also found guilty in connection to the case.
The time has come for us to take our own decision as a nation. Even if we are to be blamed by others, we don't care, as long as the decision we take is for the sake of helping our country and the world in general. The sentence which has been given is in accordance with the law of the country, and I would like to warn all those who are involved in ivory smuggling. We shall take action regardless of their status. We will not allow anyone to continue benefiting from this illegal business.
Senegal's President Macky Sall is the strong favorite to win the Sunday's election. He is facing 4 contenders in the first round of voting, after 2 of Senegal's best-known opposition figures were ruled out because of corruption convictions. Many voters and foreign backers applaud Sall for boosting economic growth, but students are frustrated and hope the new government will improve Senegal's education system.
Education, being a student, is a fundamental for a country, and the development of a country and Senegal's education system suffers because the students are guided towards the private sector. They are suffering. The state needs to review its policy on education.
Time for a second break. We'll be back in a minute. Welcome back. Thousands of people have rallied in Paris against the rise of anti-Semitic attacks in recent weeks. In one of the attacks, around 80 graves were vandalized on Tuesday. Leaders of the main political parties, including former presidents François Hollande and Nicolas Sarkozy, joined the protest. Under the slogan "Enough," people demanded the end of attacks against the Jewish community.
I think that anti-Semitic actions are on the rise. It's something that strikes fears, that brings back bad memories. We want to show younger generations that there is another path to take.
We were horrified because it was a philosopher that was attacked. But there are also little people who get insulted because they are part of a minority every day. And what are we doing about that?
French police have released footage showing yellow vest protesters pelting a police car with stones. The recording from inside the car shows men with their faces covered attacking the car as it makes its way down the motorway. The prosecutor's office has now opened an investigation into the incident. The Yellow Vest protests are entering their 4th month now. U.S. Senator Bernie Sanders said he's running for the Democratic Party's presidential nomination in 2020. Sanders mounted a fierce challenge to frontrunner Hillary Clinton in 2016. The 77-year-old released a video Tuesday pledging to build a large grassroots movement to confront the special interests.
Our campaign is not only about defeating Donald Trump, the most dangerous president in modern American history. It is not only about winning the Democratic nomination and the general election. Our campaign is about transforming our country and creating a government based on the principles of economic, social, racial, and environmental justice. Our campaign is about taking on the powerful special interests that dominate our economic and political life.
Hundreds have taken to the streets of Indian-administered Kashmir against the visit of the Saudi Crown Prince. Prince Mohammed bin Salman is arriving from Pakistan, which is accused of harboring Islamist terrorists and mastermind a suicide bombing which killed 44. Pakistan denies the allegations. Mohammed bin Salman is expected to hold talks on trade. Thousands of people in Sri Lanka have gathered to celebrate the annual Buddhist Naban procession. Traditional drummers, dancers, and monks gather in Sri Lanka's capital to participate in the parade. Dozens of elephants also play a part in the festival. And with this story, we come to the end of this news brief. You can find this and many other stories in our website at telsurenglish.net. And don't forget to follow us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For Telesur English, I'm Jose Daniel Lopez. Thank you for watching.